No, he was in Japan when he was younger, so he has a story to tell us. He came from Boston and he's bringing to us a really encouraging speech, so please pay attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. It does my heart well to see all of you. I'm not going to take too much of your time this evening, but there is a story that I'd like to tell. It's a story that begins in Plymouth, Massachusetts, travels to a town called Shichigama, Japan, and ends here tonight. I grew up in Plymouth, America's hometown. I don't mind admitting that growing up, I was a shy, dorky kid. I didn't have many friends, but I had a loving family. This story begins at my middle school, which, I'm afraid to say, wasn't the easiest place for a shy, dorky kid to be. Middle school was very tough for me. As I understand now, it was tough for most people. But there was one bright spot in my day, my earth science class. My teacher, Mr. Bldg, was one of those teachers who changes a student's life. He did it without flair, without fanfare, with no special effects or quirky catchphrases. As young as I was, he respected me. He listened. He taught. From time to time, he would tell us of different places he had been, measuring glaciers in Alaska, studying volcanoes in Hawaii. And on some of those trips, he took his students. I had so desperately wanted to be one of them, standing in some remote corner of the world that only a few people will ever see. So one day, I approached Mr. Bldg and asked him if maybe I could go with him and his students on one of his adventures. I instinctively prepared myself for a laugh or a rejection, but Mr. Bldg, like all great teachers, met me with a smile. "Michael," he said, "I have just the thing for you." 4 months later, I found myself on a plane to Japan with a student delegation to Plymouth sister city, the student delegation to our sister city, Shichigama. There was a group of 10 high school students, chaperones and me, a 13-year-old, and to my disappointment, Mr. Bldg was not amongst them. The older boys were much older and quite a bit larger than me, and they liked to talk about things which I had no experience, namely girls. As for the girls on the trip, I was much too scared to even try talking to them. I knew that if I tried, I would receive that famous female eye roll that all the gentlemen in the room should be vaguely familiar with. The trip to Shichigama was a 24-hour marathon of planes, trains, and buses. The town was located in Miyagi Prefecture of northern Japan. Most of the images that we see on TV of the destruction are from the Miyagi Prefecture. On the bus leading us to our final destination, as I sat next to a group of boys who wouldn't talk to me, and a group of girls whom I couldn't talk to, I was tired and alone, thousands of miles from home. I began to feel as though I'd made a horrible mistake. If there had been some way for me to have known that 20 years later, the beautiful foreign landscape that rolled past my bus window would be swept away by a giant, destructive wave of seawater, perhaps I would have realized how small my problems really were. But instead, I climbed off that bus, a scared little kid. For the Japanese, hosting an American student delegation was a huge deal, and quite honestly, I was surprised. The bus had dropped us off at an elementary school where a huge welcoming celebration was being held. There, the Japanese family, who had agreed to take us into their homes, waited to meet us with hundreds of their neighbors. As I stood on a stage in their auditorium, watching the other students being called one by one to meet their friends, I don't think I've ever been more afraid in my whole life. True, I hadn't clicked with my travel mates, but at least they were from home. When they were gone, I would be truly alone. It was terrifying. Until, of course, my name was called, and my host family stepped out of the crowd to greet me. And once again, just like my teacher, Mr. Bldg, I was met with a smile. The Kiyatas, a mother, a father, and their 2 daughters, bowed to me, and I bowed to them in return. We stepped back into the crowd together, all the while they were beaming. It was a pride that came from the fact that of all the families who had applied to host us, they were among those chosen. They smiled and bowed to their friends and the other families. And without knowing what had happened, I realized I was smiling too. This was not going to be like anything that I had thought. We were there for 2 weeks, and there are many stories that I could tell, but my time is limited. Ask me later tonight, and I will tell you the relief that filled me when I learned that their oldest daughter, Tomo, spoke English. I will tell you how for 2 weeks the Kiyatas drove me everywhere I needed to go for our scheduled tours and events. I will tell you how, before our trip to Sendai, the big city, Tomo's grandmother snuck me aside with her finger to her mouth like this, and placed $100 into my hands, a secret indulgence that she reserved for her own grandchildren. I will tell you about the day we stayed with our host families and how they took me to a sunflower farm where thousands of the yellow flowers stretched for as far as the eye could see, or how later that night Mr. Kiyata absolutely owned me in a game of bowling. I can tell you about the sights I saw and the amazing things that were there, about a beautiful country with the beautiful people. But my favorite times were at night, when I sat cross-legged in a small room that served as the Kiyata's dining and family room, and we talked and we laughed. They would ask me questions about America, about my school, about my family, and about myself. Tomo would translate for us one at a time, but we would laugh together. They fed me and gave me a safe place to sleep. Mr. Kiyata had even given me robes he wore as a young man in religious ceremonies. It was a great honor. I still have them, and one day I plan to give them to my son. I'm not sure when or how it happened, but I remember realizing that we were no longer strangers. We were family. To them, I was not the same little dork who was too shy to talk to the girls. I was a brother, a son, a grandchild, their friend. Saying goodbye to the Kiyatas was more difficult than I would have thought possible 2 weeks earlier, but I was not the same boy who they had first met. It may be cliched to say, but their acceptance of me and who I was had given me strength. Strength to make friends with the high school boys who I was on the trip with, strength even to talk to some of the girls, strength to go home, make new friends, and enter high school with the knowledge that I had value inside of me that allowed me to leave that scared little boy behind. I'm not sure they even knew it, but the strength, that confidence was the greatest gift of my life. On March 11, 2011, a 9.0 earthquake struck off the northern coast of Japan, only miles away from Shishigama and the homes of my friends. 45 minutes later, energy from that massive earthquake sent water from the ocean sweeping over the Japanese countryside, washing away cars, homes, and lives in a mere moment. We have all seen the unbelievable images on TV, videos of the destruction that looked more like a Hollywood disaster movie than reality. My thoughts immediately turned to the Kiyatas. A week passed before I heard from Tomo. She, her newborn daughter, and the rest of her family miraculously survived, but half of Shishigama was destroyed and is still underwater. They are alive, but their lives will never be the same. Their homes are gone, washed away. Their businesses, grocery stores, cars, buses, trucks, schools, shopping malls, colleges, rice fields, all gone. I cannot stand here and tell you that I can imagine what it must be like to be them. I cannot imagine how afraid they must be as they wait in their line for food and water, as they wait for news of family and friends, as they wait for futures that are no longer their own. They may not know it, but they are waiting for us. 20 years ago, the Kiyatas and the Japanese people gave me a gift of strength and courage that has shaped the course of my life. Until tonight, I have not been able to pay them back. I said earlier that I was going to tell you a story that ends here tonight, but I was wrong. Tonight, all of us have a chance to add a new chapter. Make my story your story, a story that we will continue to tell long after tonight. The Kiatas, their friends, their family, their countrymen need strength and courage, and we are in a position to give it to them. They need to know that, like that little boy standing on stage in a foreign land so many years ago, they are not alone. I have no right to ask you for this. I stand before you a beggar who needs your help to pay a debt to a people that I cannot pay on my own. I ask you with everything that I am, please help the people of Japan. Give them strength, give them courage, give them life. Become part of the story that in 20 years you will be able to tell, and from which you will gain strength in the telling. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here tonight listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Well, now